Competent, super competent Lenore, who's on the program committee for ACE. And ACE is what I'm director of, Arts, Culture, Education, ACE. So what do we have coming up? Lemon Sponge Cake, Contemporary Ballet, which is a really world-class ballet company, will be performing here in September. That's this, after an art show, that's this flyer outside. And we have something very exciting that I just wanted to take a minute to tell you about coming up in the fall. We have our lunch and learns, and we have speakers, and we have a lot of programs, but we have something new called Music at the J. And Music at the J is a monthly musical series. We call it a concert series, although they are concerts, but each one is more than a concert. Because what we do here with Arts, Culture, and Education is we use the cultural arts to engage people, and we love to have the cultural arts teach us about our culture and our life. And so we always include music appreciation or art appreciation or music history. We always include those other elements that really, enrich us and teach us to be better and more appreciative audiences. So we have everything from a Broadway show tune event, which focuses on how Jewish immigrants came over to the United States and wrote some of the most popular show tune songs like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, projecting a dream of the Golden Latinos, a new land. It was a Jewish yearning for a new land, and how did the immigrant dreams find their way to the Broadway musical? So you'll hear some really beautiful, wonderful songs, but you'll also learn a little bit about that history and that tradition. We have a Paul Simon tribute concert, a Klezmania, folk roots hootenanny about the early folk. So we can have a lot of really wonderful programs that all are kind of in a cultural context. Please do pick up a flyer, because we're starting in September, and also pick up this flyer, which has all of our entire fall programs. This goes through the entire year. So it's going to be a very exciting year at the J. This is our second year in this new building, and we really feel like we're finally, finding our filling the jacket. I think we came and the jacket was just a little too big on us, and now we sort of feel like we're finding, the space to be comfortable, and we're really excited about this. So I'm going to introduce Sheila Malcolm, who has been, as I said, a wonderful partner and wonderful presence in the community, always part of whatever needs to happen. So a real friend of the community, Sheila, and she'll introduce Paul.
I'll be brief. So a year ago, I was honored to be in this space, which is the Beth Ami Colorado Congregation for Humanistic Judaism room at the JCC, kindly granted by Gordon and Grace Gamm. And if you live in the community, those are familiar names. I did a presentation at that point called Approaching End of Life from a humanistic Jewish perspective. We had a beautiful turnout, and I'm thrilled that, again, Humanistic Judaism is honored to be present here to kick off this sort of lunch and learn, brunch and learn season that Catherine and her wonderful committee organized. So thank you all for being here. And just a quick look around. If you are already affiliated with Beth Ami, could you just raise your hand so that people who are not might want to approach you and ask you questions? We are a local congregation. We do not have a home officially. We rent space. We do not have a rabbi officially, but we have some leadership. And we focus on cultural Judaism. We do have a website, bethami.com, and we will have high holidays coming up, which will occur both at the Avalon Ballroom right across the street, the Meadows Library, and Veely Lake next to South Boulder Rec Center. So that will all be coming out on various digital media for you to see in the near future. I'd like to also bring it home to this weekend. It's been a delight to host Paul Golin, the executive director of the Society. We have had a whirlwind. This is our last event. I'm going to miss you. It's been great. And each topic that he's espoused on has been interesting and thought-provoking, and I think that you'll agree that will be happening today. Last night in Denver at the Secular Hub, I read some haikus. And once Paul starts talking, you'll understand why I chose to read some haikus for Jews. I'm not going to do that today because it won't take the time. But try and figure that out as soon as he starts to speak and you see some beautiful photos. Paul Golin has been a breath of fresh air for the Society for Humanistic Judaism. You'll all learn some more about it. Right now it's our umbrella organization, and Beth Ami is our local community. And so our local community welcomes Paul.
These kind intros are tough because it's all downhill from there. Thank you, and I want to also express my thanks to Lenore Kingston, especially Sheila Malcolm, for the incredible amount of work that they do all the time, and especially this past weekend. And I want to single out, and not embarrassed, but thank Terry Fleischer for coming to all 6 of my events over the past 4 days. I don't have your gold star sticker on me, but I will mail it to you. But thank you, I really appreciate it. But I appreciate all of you being here. I do see that some of you were at some of the other things we did this weekend. I apologize in advance for the repeat of any jokes I might make that you won't. So today we're going to talk about intermarriage, and what I'd like to do, because I've been working on this and it's touched me personally, there's so much about it, and so much of it is not actually about marriage, that we can go in a whole variety of directions with it. So what I'd like to do is hopefully share with you some information that perhaps you didn't already know about intermarriage, and then open it up and we'll have a conversation. And when I say intermarriage, what I'm talking about is when a Jewish person marries somebody who's not Jewish, and then you may also hear me say in marriage, which means when a Jewish person marries somebody who is Jewish. So who can tell me who this is? Tevya from Fiddler on the Roof. Fiddler on the Roof is perhaps welcome. Come on in. Thanks. So we're just getting started, and Gordon, we're going to put you on the spot right away. You know who that is? Tevya, that's right. Fiddler on the Roof is perhaps the most well-known Jewish expression of art ever. Who here hasn't yet seen the play or movie Fiddler on the Roof? It's a 45-year-old movie. Do you mind if I spoil it for you? I'm going to talk about the ending, so if you don't want to hear how it ends, cover your ears. He's got 5 daughters. This takes place in the shtetl, the Pale of Settlement between Poland and Russia, where many of us can trace our ancestors. He has 5 daughters, which is back then like a curse, because you're the one always paying for the wedding. And basically, the whole progression of the story is each daughter transgresses his understanding of Judaism, and he weighs the benefits and downside to accepting it. Until his 5th daughter wants to marry somebody who isn't Jewish, and then there's no other hand. He disowns her. And this art that came out as a Broadway play and a huge blockbuster hit in 1964, and then as a successful movie in 1971, came out at a time when this notion was already nostalgia for the Jewish community, because at that point, intermarriage had really started to explode. So I want to very quickly talk about 3,000 years of history and try to do it as quickly as humanly possible. Intermarriage has always been part of the Jewish story. It's in the Bible. Some of our greatest leaders were intermarried, not necessarily in the way we understand it in the modern context. In the Bible, Jewish identity was passed from father to children. That flipped after diaspora. But many of our leaders, including Moses, married somebody outside the tribe. And back then it wasn't just this cutesy expression, it was genuinely someone from another tribe. Moses' father-in-law was a Mennonite priest, and he helped Moses so much that he has a chapter in Exodus named in his honor. So there is a prohibition against marrying the other tribes, which has been extrapolated to mean don't intermarry. And yet throughout the stories in the Bible, there's intermarriage that is both good and bad. On the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, we read the book of Ruth. Ruth was married to a Jewish son of a woman named Naomi, who gets killed. And the son gets killed. Naomi comes to the funerals, and Ruth says, "Take me back with you to Judea." And she says, "Your people are my people, and your God is my God." And it's important. It wasn't done by accident that the order of that statement was, "Your people are my people, your God is my God." It was purposely put people first, God second. And so Ruth is considered the first convert to Judaism, but in the text, it's based on that statement and how she lives out her life. And she's rewarded by being the great-grandmother of King David, and and his descendant is supposedly going to be the Messiah. So there's a mixed message in the liturgy, the original source material of Judaism around intermarriage. And I once wrote a piece arguing, wouldn't it be great if today conversion to Judaism were as easy as what Ruth did, to make this statement and then to live out your life as a Jew? And I got a phone call from an Orthodox rabbi who said, "I'm getting it wrong, that just because it's not written in the text doesn't mean that Ruth didn't have a mikvah, which is a ritual bath, which is part of conversion process in Orthodoxy today, and a Beit Din, which is a rabbinic court of rabbis who will oversee the conversion." And I said to him, how could Ruth have had a Beit Din 1,000 years before rabbinic Judaism? 1,000 years before the first rabbi. And he gave me an answer that completely shut me up, which was, you either believe or you don't believe. And he's right, and so I don't argue with folks who believe in Judaism from an Orthodox perspective. But that's 10% of American Jewry, and I argue with the other 90%. So, intermarriage, if you are an Ashkenazi Jew with both of your parents Jewish, there is still intermarriage somewhere in your lineage. When the Second Temple was destroyed, Jews went into diaspora, meaning we were the minority in every country where we lived. But that includes Ethiopia, where the Jews from Ethiopia look like Ethiopians. It includes China, where there was a Jewish community up until about 100, 150 years ago, and they looked Chinese. And it includes folks like me, who I trace my ancestry to the Pale Settlement, Poland and Russia, and I describe myself as pasty white. So that wasn't happening because of proximity to the sun. That was happening because of intermarriage. So there was intermarriage happening, and then it got clamped down by the larger majority society and internally by the Jewish community. So fast forward to America, which provided freedoms like never before to the people who were coming here, and Jews began to intermarry. And there were some high-profile intermarriages in the early 20th century, particularly among some Jewish celebrities. But intermarriage rates were still around 5% through the 1950s. And then in the 60s, it started to skyrocket. So what changed in the 1960s? What were some of the things that were happening? Anyone want to suggest what?
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Absolutely. So civil rights movement was a key change for the way the Jews saw themselves and the way Americans saw the Jews. And there is a a great book called How Jews Became White Folk. There was a time in America when Jews were not considered white, Italians were not considered white, and so on. And notions of race and ethnicity have been constantly changing over time. And what happened was anti-Semitism declined rapidly in the 1960s. Now today, we're facing actual renewal of anti-Semitism. But even today, compared to the way things were in the 30s and 40s and 50s in America, we have unprecedented freedom as Jews. We have no restrictions on where we can live, as have been done to us in the past, and so forth, where we can go to school. So Jews began moving out of traditional Jewish neighborhoods where they become a lower percentage of the population. And people fall in love with the folks who they meet. It's hard, although now there's the internet, it's hard to fall in love with someone who you've never met before. So there were a whole variety of factors. In 1970, the umbrella Jewish organization of United Federations did a population survey of Jews. And they found that in the previous 5 years, so 65 to 70, 33% of the Jews who had married somebody not Jewish. This was 1965 to 1970, 33%. They were so shaken by that, they didn't do another study again until 1990. In 1990, they found the rate in the previous 5 years, so 85 to 90, had gone up to 52% intermarriage rate. The Pew survey that came out in 2013 of American Jewry found that among non-Orthodox Jews in the past 5 years, the intermarriage rate was 70%. Now, what does this actually mean, though, when we talk about intermarriage rates? This Pew survey of American Jewry in 2013 gave intermarriage rates. It gave rates, not numbers. The only number it gave was number of Jews. And then, based on that, I extrapolated what this meant in terms of households, married households, and compared intermarried households to in-married households. And today in America, there are more intermarried households than in-married households by over 300,000. This is a number that was not put out by the Jewish community and that you won't hear in the organized Jewish community. You'll hear rates, but rates don't help you really understand what the result of the rate is. So 58% intermarriage rate includes the Orthodox, who have very low intermarriage rates. What does it mean to have a 58% intermarriage rate? So let's pretend the rate is back down to 50 because it's an even number, and I apologize that we're going to do some math, but it's not algebra. Let's pretend there's only 4 Jews, and you've got a 50% intermarriage rate. So what that means is that half of them are intermarrying and half are in-marrying. Well, the in-marrying Jews marry each other, so that creates one household. The intermarrying Jews are marrying people from outside of the Jewish community and are creating 2 households. So for 30 plus years, the Jewish community has been sitting with this 50% intermarriage rate, and that's all they talk about, when the reality is they should be saying that the rate of household creation is double for intermarried households than it is for in-married households. Another message you won't hear from large segments of the organized Jewish community is that intermarriage is good. And the reason why I say that is because an intermarriage means that 2 people have found love. And that's the best part of life. And that's the purpose. It's a big part of the purpose of living, is to find love. And I think it's really unfortunate to have to suggest that there is one kind of love that's better than another, and I won't. And I think that our movement, secular humanistic Judaism, is the only denomination in Judaism that can say so with no strings attached. Now, the Reform movement I want to praise because some of the changes that they instituted in the 80s when they recognized the rise of intermarriage have been profound and are super important. So what happened? Actually, the Reconstructionist movement before them, and then the Reform movement, rejected the notion that Judaism is passed from mother to children, which had been instituted 2,000 years earlier, and said that either parent can pass Judaism to their child, which means that now half or more of American Jews would accept my children as Jewish, which is awesome. and I am so appreciative that they made that change. But they still distinguish and prioritize in marriage over intermarriage in certain ways. So only half of Reform rabbis will officiate at an intermarriage, at a wedding. I cannot become a rabbi in the Reform movement if I wanted to, because I'm intermarried. So there are, and the reason for it is because they wrote this, that rabbis are held to a higher standard. And most intermarried families that are benefiting from being part of the Reform movement actually don't know that. I don't want to necessarily pop their bubble, but I'm aware of it, and it bothers me. So I think that the future is us getting past this and recognizing that marriage is a good thing for the people who want to marry each other, regardless of who they might be. But it does raise complicated questions about who's a Jew, about Jewish continuity, about how do we pass on this thing if we find meaning and value in being Jewish. I don't think the communal response for that segment of the community to privilege in marriage has worked. The goal was, let's slow down intermarriage. That clearly has not worked. And I think that the prohibitions that are still in place are actually more hurtful than they are helpful. And ultimately, what we get at here is a larger question of why be Jewish at all? Why should anybody, married, intermarried, single, divorced, single parents, want to be a part of Jewish life and Jewish community? So it's not an intermarriage crisis, actually. There are more Jews in America today than at any time in US history. Again, not part of the narrative of the organized Jewish community, which wants to sell you on crisis. We have grown as in numbers, and we grew, and it's written in this Pew survey from 2013, because more intermarried households are raising their kids Jewish. And of course, then the inevitable knock is, well, what kind of Jews are they? The challenge is, for the organized Jewish community, is about affiliation. Only 69% of Jews identify with a denomination. When I say only, you might think, well, that doesn't seem like such a bad number, but compared to how it has been in years past, that's much lower. And those who are actually affiliated at any given moment is only about a third, and even less who attend synagogue at least monthly. And remember, 10% of American Jews are Orthodox, so you can presume almost all of them are attending synagogue at least monthly. So that leaves 13% of the remaining 90%, if someone can do that math in their head. I can. The Pew survey also asked Jews what's essential to being Jewish. And you can see that being part of a Jewish community, where that little arrow is, only 28% of Jews surveyed said it was essential to be, in order to be Jewish, it was essential to be part of an organized Jewish community. To me, that should be the scariest number for the organized Jewish community. But what's interesting is what Jews did say was essential to being Jewish. So top was remembering the Holocaust at 73%. And that is interesting and surprising a bit to me, but not a bad thing. It was just surprising that it was the number one thing. Leading an ethical and moral life at 69% is great. I don't know who the 31% don't think it's And working for justice and equality at 56%, being intellectually curious only 49%, but still, all of this above being part of an organized Jewish community. So a lot of the negativity around intermarriage it bleeds into the conversation around intermarriage, when in reality, what we're talking about is an affiliation crisis, not necessarily a crisis around marriage. But intermarriage does accelerate certain trends, certain societal trends. So this notion of Jewish ethnicity and tribalism is going away, not for everybody, just for many or most of us. My wife is Japanese, that's the mention of haikus for Jews. My kids will not look Ashkenazi Jewish if there is a way to look Jewish, which there isn't, because as I've said, Jews have always been racially and ethnically diverse, but that has accelerated with intermarriage. So the notion of we are members of the tribe is comfortable for the folks who feel comfortable being in that, in the inside, and then very uncomfortable for people for whom that says, yeah, but half of my family is this other tribe. And so my cousins are half Irish, half Jewish, and my kids will be half Jewish, half Japanese, or I think the better phrase is both Jewish and Japanese. And this notion of tribal allegiance is going to be weaker for them if it exists at all, because they've got at least 2 tribes. And I'm actually more than okay with that, because I generally think that tribalism is a bad thing. It was a survival mechanism for many years, but I have an optimistic view of the future of humanity, and I think a piece of that is getting past tribalism. But not everyone thinks that way. Joiners and fixed denominational identities is going away. People don't want to wave a particular flag for the rest of their lives. They don't say, I'm a Reformed Jew, I was born a Reformed Jew, I'm going to die a Reformed Jew. No, nobody's talking like that anymore, because they recognize it's about personal meaning for them, and so they're less likely to affiliate with just one denomination. And Jewish religiosity is going away also, again, in part because of exposure to other religions. And if you grow up in a household where there are more than one religious traditions, sure, some folks pick one over the other, but many others say, well, they can't both be right, maybe they're both wrong. So, so that's accelerating secularity. And this notion of Jewish obligation, that you should do anything at all because you are Jewish, and that you should do it for the Jewish people, as opposed to you should make the world a better place for all people. So this is a tension between universalism and particularism, and that tension again has been with Jews since the very first Jews. And there's the very famous quote of, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And that's the tension, right? And nowadays, many young Jews feel like we're okay for the most part, and our work in fixing the world is about helping other people. And I don't want to necessarily disagree with that. So the good news that I see is that intermarried households recognize a benefit and value of raising Jewish children. So again, from the Pew survey, 61% of intermarried households who have children under 18 when the survey was done are raising them with some Jewish identity. Pew distinguished between Jews by religion and Jews not by religion. What this means is, and they've been doing this on Jewish surveys since at least 1990. You pick up the phone, somebody says to you, what religion are you? You say, I'm not really religious. What's your background? I'm Jewish. You're a Jew by no religion. So they had to identify Jews by asking 2 questions. So the first question is, what religion are you? The folks who said Jewish are Jewish by religion. So here's the thing. So I'm an atheist. I would have said, when they said, what religion are you? I would have said Jewish, because I know what they're getting at. So I wouldn't have said, well, I have no religion. And plus, I have secular humanistic Judaism, which is a non-theistic religion. I probably would not have explained that to the survey. But you can see that intermarried households are doing something Jewish with them. And again, the tension, the organized Jewish community is really uncomfortable with this idea of partly Jewish by religion, because it means that there's something else happening in the household. And in my own personal journey, I was there at one point in terms of how do you raise Jews, and I'm in a different place now about that, because I've met so many people who were raised with multiple expressions of cultural identity and even religious identity, and come away feeling Jewish. And one of the things that the Pew survey found was 94% of all the Jews they spoke to said that they were proud to be Jewish. So I feel optimistic about these numbers. Much of the Jewish community was very concerned. Just very quickly, so the flip side of how interfaith families are raising their kids these days, and And I think a large part is because of the outreach that the Jewish community has done, so I don't want to be totally negative. There are large sectors of the Jewish community that has worked hard to welcome interfaith families. So if you look at, this is the adult children of intermarriage. These are people born to only one Jewish parent. 65 and up, very few of them consider themselves Jewish, either by religion or of no religion. And as you get to younger cohorts, that percentage increases. So this is exactly opposite of what the Jewish community has told itself for decades, which is that the more intermarriage you have, the less Jews you will have. And this has flipped, again, because once you go past 50%, which we've done with our younger cohorts, children of intermarriage under the age of 30, you have growth. That's what, because again, we're talking about replacement here, and if only one Jew in that intermarried household has 1.8 kids, I know it's hard to have 1.8 kids, but that's how the average works out, you still have growth because you're only replacing one Jew in those interfaith households. The irony here is that if there had been no intermarriage in America, our numbers would have declined because our birth rate is 1.8, and you need it to be 2.1 to replace yourselves. And, as I said, religiosity is declining. So, again, as you go down the age cohort, the folks who are willing to say to poll takers who ask, what is your religion? I have no religion, increase as you get younger. And again, this is related to, but not necessarily because of the increase in intermarriage. And you've got more children of intermarriage as you get younger. And more of them will say, I have no religion, but then when asked, yes, I'm Jewish culturally, I'm Jewish through my ancestry, which was the finding not just among the intermarried or children of intermarriage, but all Jews would rather define Jewishness as by ancestry and culture than by religion. So of all Jews, 62% say being Jewish is mainly a matter of ancestry and culture, 15% say it's mainly a matter of religion, and 23% say it's all together a matter of religion, ancestry, and culture. And of course, obviously, that increases with Jews of no religion, who almost all feel it's a matter of ancestry and culture. So what does that mean? Let's talk about the future. Who's used virtual reality yet? In 3 years when I ask that, I won't even need to ask that because you all will. There is billions of dollars being poured into virtual reality and augmented reality, and we'll all be using it. And in virtual reality, you can be anyone and do anything. But the reality is, you can so the question is, if in the future everyone is everything, what from Judaism would we take with us? What is working for people? What provides meaning? What makes life better? And when you have those answers, I would then also ask, why does it have to be limited only to people who are Jewish? And then, how is it accessible to everyone? Who is going to curate it? Who's going to put it together? And the future is already here, because this was from an earlier Pew survey of all Americans that found about half of American adults have changed religious affiliation at least once during their lives. And most leave their childhood faith before 24. Many of those changed religions do so more than once. Now, Pew considered Protestantism and Catholicism two different religions, and I guess they are. From a Jewish perspective, it seems like Christianity to me, but either way. And also, if you think about this from the Jewish perspective, and you think denominations, how many people here who were born Jewish are not the denomination you grew up in? Right? So even in this room, it's about half. So people already have free choice to be and do whatever they want to do around religion, including no religion, leaving it completely behind. So Judaism has to compete in the marketplace, which in some ways we already do. The Jewish community was generally bewildered by Madonna and her interest in Kabbalah, but I was kind of psyched about it, having actually remembered early good Madonna. And, every couple of years, I said this yesterday also, every couple of years the Times does a new article on some Jewish ritual that people are taking on even though they have no connection to Judaism at all. So, for example, two people getting married, neither of whom are Jewish, but still want the wedding canopy, the chuppah, or still want the wedding contract, the ketubah. That's happening. And now we're also hearing about families who want a bar and bat mitzvah for their children, even though they've got no connection to the Jewish community, because they see what it's doing for the bar and bat mitzvahs that they're going to. And is this a good thing or a bad thing? It depends who you ask. This was my wedding. I got married under a chuppah, and this was my ketubah, my wedding contract. It's in Hebrew, Japanese, and English, but it is theistic. Sorry, because at the time I didn't know there was an option. We have since had 2 children. My wife looks exactly the same as she does there. I am still trying to lose the sympathy weight. It's a real thing. Look it up. These are my in-laws during our wedding hora, being lifted up in chairs, wearing their traditional Japanese kimono. So we have decided to merge cultures. We agreed to raise our children Jewish religiously, meaning the non-theistic religion of secular humanistic Judaism. But they will have a Jewish identity, I hope. My son is 5, he already calls himself Jupanese. And I moderate the Jupanese Facebook page if you're interested. There are over 1,000 people like that page. I put no work into it, but every time I see something and there is some remarkable parallels or connections between either Israel and Japan or Jewishness and Japanese. So I don't think that they're going to have a problem keeping these things in tension, in balance, and also be fully American at the same time. So, but we'll see, because they're only 5. But I know I'm not alone in doing this experiment. I'm pretty confident in saying that there are more Jews married to Japanese people today than at any time in history. It's still a tiny percentage, but we're getting there. And now there is a whole bunch of people in Japan who know what Judaism is. And so it's been a great journey. So I've thrown a lot out at you. I'll leave you with these questions. From the Jewish communal point of view, is the goal around intermarriage to make them look more like us, or do we need to acknowledge that we, as a Jewish community, is changed forever? And we're in a phase right now of transition, and we don't know what the future is going to look like, but we're all part of building that future, and the future I'd like to see is one that is genuinely inclusive, one that is less about, or not at all about, who you were born to, but what you do and what you do with this information and content and culture and meaning and ritual and even religiosity, if that is important to you. I think that we are in this great transition, and I'm thrilled actually to be working for an organization and a movement that I think is way out ahead of the curve on this. So in 1988, the secular humanistic Judaism movement declared that a Jew is a person of Jewish descent, or any person who declares him or herself to be a Jew, and who identifies with the history, ethical values, culture, civilization, community, and future of the Jewish people. It should probably be and/or future of the Jewish people. In other words, if you tell me you're Jewish, you're Jewish. I'm not going to be that authenticator that sometimes the Jewish community tries to serve as, and I think that we're at a point where that's extremely detrimental. On the other hand, I understand why, if you are operating an Orthodox prayer service and you want a minyan of 10 men, that they need to be matrilineal Jewish men. That's Orthodoxy, and there's a space for that. And conservative Judaism has space, and Reform Judaism has space for it. But I don't think there are enough spaces or big enough spaces for an organized Judaism that simply says, come as you are. What we've got is meaning and value, and we want to share it, regardless of where you're starting from. because we think this can make your life better, or this could make your family's life better, or this could make you make the world a better place. So thank you for that, for letting me kind of spill all my beans on you, and I am open to go wherever you want to go with this conversation. Yes.
I'm just curious, getting back to the percentages of the whole intermarriage marriage. The question that keeps coming up to me is, how does that apply to conversion?
Right. So the question is, how does the intermarriage statistics apply to conversion? And I would say it doesn't. For me, conversion is in marriage. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't also be sensitivities, because it means that a set of grandparents are not Jewish, and so we still need to be thinking about inclusion, but it's not measured in the intermarriage numbers, and it's a very small percentage of people who convert anyway. But when I was talking about the celebrities in the earlier half of the 20th century who intermarried, I was going to name them and I decided not to, but the two that I was thinking of. Adam Sandler, well, that was the later part of the 20th century. But Sammy Davis Jr. converted to Judaism, but Harry Houdini was super famous for his time, and he was intermarried. And I was going to say Arthur Miller, the playwright, except Marilyn Monroe converted right, like moments before their Jewish wedding. But still, score one for the Jews, right?
Could you go back to that slide where you had the reasons why people can identify themselves as Jewish?
So it's, what they think is essential to being Jewish?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. You have that leading an ethical and moral life, 69%, and people were laughing when you said, well, who would not want to identify with an ethical and moral life? But I think people who might have been part of that 31% were saying that they could lead an ethical and moral life without necessarily being Jewish. So it wasn't the Jewishness that brought them to that position. And I think as humanistic Jews, we really have an opportunity to explore with people how their humanistic Judaism, in fact, enriches their ethical and moral life, and that it really gives us a good marketing tool, so to speak, to bring people into humanistic Judaism and recognizing the values that we bring to the table both as Jews and as humanists.
That's a great point. Thank you. And I won't say that again next time I do this presentation, or I'll point that out, because I think it's great. And from the humanist perspective, which for those of you who this is a new word, it's a movement, it's an understanding, a philosophy of life that says basically humans are responsible for making the positive change in the world that we want to make. And we can't wait for supernatural intervention to fix it for us. We've got to make the change ourselves, and that humans can determine what is ethically and morally correct, and we do. And so absolutely, people may be saying, I don't need religion to tell me what is right and wrong. And then the knock from the religious side is sometimes, how can you know what's right or wrong if you don't believe in God? And of course we do, and of course religion has caused at times horrific things to happen in the name of religion. So no one has a monopoly on ethics and values. So that's a really interesting point. Thank you.
I have twin sons, one who married a lapsed Catholic, the other one who married a Laotian Buddhist. And I have two and a half beautiful grandchildren. So at Christmas time, the Catholic-Jewish combination has a menorah, they have a Christmas tree with a Star of David on the top, and the Ashkenazi Jewish Laotian Buddhist combination has a menorah, a Christmas tree, and a Buddhist shrine. So my question to you as their Ashkenazi Nana is, at the holiday time, how do I work with my grandchildren when my background is really only the Jewish background, and they have 2 to 3 different things going on in their lives?
Your role, I would suggest, is to be who you are. And they are extremely lucky to know their Nana and to know that their Nana is Jewish and to experience that. And you can't bring the Laotian piece, I don't think. So don't try. Obviously participate in it if you can, but you're not leading that part of it, but you can lead the Jewish part and they will remember it. And look, the bottom line is, as you saw from that Pew survey about religion switching and denominational switching, at a certain point, you no longer have control. They become full-fledged human beings. You know, in the Jewish tradition, the fetus doesn't become considered fully human until it has a master's degree. You know? At a certain point, Dad, one of his jokes finally worked. That you can be who you are and be true to your identity. But the challenge, though, is for those for whom Judaism is like purely this kind of ethnic identity, and they can't articulate what it is they're getting out of it. Yeah. And they just want their grandkids to be Jewish and look like them and behave like them. But that's not going to happen. And we know it's not going to happen because if we think about, again, those of us who were born and raised Jewish, if we think about the way our grandparents expressed their Jewish identities and the way we do it, for most of us it's very different. And why do we think we're going to somehow calcify this thing now and have our own grandkids do it? If you had told my grandparents that my Judaism would not include any real understanding of Yiddish besides tuchus and buckus and stuff, and that it wouldn't be part of the labor bund, which was like essential, the labor union was essential to their Jewish identity, they might have said, you know, what kind of Jews are they going to be? They're going to lose their connection to being Jewish. And we haven't, and it's a different ballgame, and I don't expect my grandkids, who might be a quarter Jewish and a quarter Japanese and an eighth Italian, and like, who knows, to feel the same way about being Jewish that I do. But I hope that they do find what the connective pieces are that bring value to their lives. I know for myself, my interest in Jewish history helps me feel connected to the larger human story and to my own story, and know that I have a place in this human story. But I know that it's not how I'm going to excite my wife about our connection, our household connection to Judaism, because history is just not her thing. So I've got to find other points of connection for her, and we have, and we'll work on it. So Judaism is big enough and to touch on almost all aspects of your life if you're interested in it. And so I just encourage people to find all of that thing. So all you can do, all anybody can do, is express your own interests in it and be who you are, and try not to be, pushy about it. And if your grandkids know you, they'll know that piece of you.
So how many more times will they ask my blonde, blue-eyed son if he adopted his Asian-looking daughter?
That's a Race in America challenge, and it's a challenge.
Yeah.
I think it's full.
Yeah.
I'd like to speak to her comment as a grandmother.
Okay.
Dealing with similar kinds of things. And one example, I give 2 examples. One of when I kept my mouth shut, and I was glad I did, and one is when I didn't keep my mouth shut and wished I had. The one when I kept my mouth shut, my son is married to a Japanese woman who lives in Japan, and I helped facilitate a Passover Seder in their home. And of course, we did sushi for the cooked fish. And I had my Harosis starter that I brought from the States because I couldn't find the Passover wine that I wanted for my Harosis. But anyway, my daughter-in-law cooked a chicken with bacon on top. Oh, I was raised in a Reform tradition. I don't keep kosher. I never did keep kosher. When I saw that chicken come out of the oven with the bacon on top, I just had this visceral reaction in my gut. Right. That there was something wrong with having bacon on a piece of chicken on the Passover. And I kept my mouth shut.
Good for you.
My daughter decided not to circumcise her son. And I had to, there's a book called Against Circumcision, a Jewish Perspective, and I had to read that book and really come to terms with understanding philosophically where that came from so that I could support her. And I'm taking care of her daughter while she's in labor, and she calls me at 1 a.m. to let me know that she has a son, and his name is Ian Jonathan Murphy. And the first words out of my mouth, visualizing this non-circumcised boy that's just been born, is, what kind of name is that for a nice Jewish kid?
You said that?
I said that. Out of my sleep, I said it viscerally, and I wish I hadn't. I've apologized for that. But I mean, we bring ourselves to the table, and we've got to do our own work in order to be able to be present with our kids and accept the decisions that they make.
Thank you. See, another Japanese couple is trending. And we use wasabi on our Seder plate as the bitter herb. And now this year we're going to do chicken with bacon because that sounds good. Yes, ma'am.
I have a difficult question because I'm from Israel and I agree with everything you are talking about. But I have I'm unhappy with what's going on in my life. And I have more of a conflict because where is it going and what is it?
What specific? She's from Israel and has a challenge with what in terms of what's going on in Israel.
I'm saying I agree with all this philosophy, but Israel is a big problem. It's
Yes.
a different problem. It's a difficult problem. And I wonder what you think about
Well, thank
this.
you.
Where is it going
Yeah.
together with
Good
this
question.
land that is in trouble?
Right. Well, thank you for asking about the third rail in Jewish life that I never want to talk about. On our website, SHJ.org, we have a statement about Israel, and it supports a two-state solution. And it's a pretty generic statement that I feel a majority of certainly American Jews would agree with. And then all the rest of it is just my personal commentary, and I'm not sure that it's really relevant. But I will tell you that to relate it to intermarriage, there's a couple of ways that it impacts on Israel. And so, first of all, American support for Israel is important to Israel's survival. I think that's a fairly neutral statement. And again, this appeal to tribalism or peoplehood is the nicer word that the community is using nowadays, is going to be a less powerful appeal to intermarried families who, if I'm going to write a check to the Jewish National Fund, I have to explain to my wife why we're giving charity to this particular organization over another organization. So I have to articulate what the value is there. Now, I took my wife to Israel twice, and she really loved the country, which I was glad that she feels some kind of connection to Israel as well. But Israel is in a tribal place right now, right? It's tribes. These are tribes fighting each other, and the challenge is if you try to envision a future, and it seems like a much further future for Israel than it does here, of one in which people are just genuinely mixed and tribalism has really subsided, and there's a decline in that kind of way people identify. Could that happen in Israel too? And there is intermarriage between Israelis and Palestinians, and both sides hate it. But when people are in proximity to each other, they fall in love. And they do that because people are people, because the overwhelming majority of people just want the same things in life. And then you got 5% who are crazy and ruined it for all the rest of us. And unfortunately, some of those happen to be in the highest offices of power in many of our countries. But so I would just say that I hope that the people in Israel who also share a future vision of a peacefulness where you can still bring your identity, and you don't have to be mixed to be tolerant of other people. But I would argue that intermarriage increases tolerance in some ways, that ultimately, if there can be an understanding between the people there, that there will be increased intermarriage, and that actually won't be a bad thing for that region.
Israel's intermarriage quite high, actually.
Among intermarriage, yes.
I mean, Israelis leave Israel and a very high rate of intermarriage.
Well, what was interesting in
because
Israel,
they're secular, majority.
right? And what's interesting about Israel's history, as far as I understand it, is that there was a time when Sephardim, those from the Middle Eastern countries, were not treated so well in Israel by the Ashkenazic power structure. And now there's been so much intermarriage between Sephardim and Ashkenazi that it's not really an issue. Now, that hasn't happened for the Ethiopian Jews, so they are still struggling with their system. So, but I want to talk about America.
Yes,
Sorry.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
This may be a little self-serving, but I noticed on one of the slides affiliation with either a synagogue or JCC was, right, affiliates with synagogue/JCC. I want to dig down into that because the JCC is not really a synagogue and is successful because it's not a synagogue and doesn't try to compete with what synagogues do, but are, along with Jewish museums over the last 20 years, along with Jewish film festivals, which I happen to run, one of the 50 across the country, they are being discovered as really wonderful opportunities for engagement on a cultural level, and they become much more popular. How does that trend factor into the demographic shift that you're talking about?
So first of all, this 33% is at any given time. So if it's over the course of a lifetime, it's much higher, like 60 or 70% of Jews have had affiliation at some point during their lives. But at any given time, it's about a third, and I think it's actually lower, but let's use these Pew numbers. JCCs, and my mom ran a JCC in Long Island for 20 years before she retired. She worked in the JCC system her whole career, and it's why I had to think about being a Jewish communal professional myself. I followed in her footsteps, so I'm a big fan of the JCC movement, but the JCC is mistaken in thinking that it's reaching a different audience than synagogue members for the most part. And there's studies that will back that up, that the overwhelming majority of Jewish members of JCCs are also synagogue members and are also giving to federations campaigns. In other words, the affiliated tend to be highly affiliated and are involved. And so that's not the case here necessarily. That's the national picture of JCCs. It may be different from one JCC to another. And I won't get too deep into it, but the reason why is because of barriers. So the way I look at the world and the way I look at why people might not be engaging with the Jewish community is because we've thrown up so many barriers, many of them inadvertent, some of them purposeful, but one of the barriers is that this is a Jewishly identified space. It says Jewish on the name. Yesterday afternoon at the Secular Hub, which was a nice crowd of folks from both Beth Ami, but also from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So we had folks who had no real connection to Judaism, and we had a man who was a lapsed Catholic stand up and say, would I be welcome in a JCC? Because he didn't think he would be, because it says Jewish Community Center. First of all, he'd never heard of it, but I said Jewish Community Center, and he felt like, and the thing is, so if let's say he was married to someone who was Jewish, he would be bringing to that relationship a tension about walking into a Jewish space. But the thing is, that tension exists for people who are Jewish, who may not have done anything since their bar bat mitzvah. Or maybe just know that they're Jewish, or maybe have one parent that's Jewish, but have never done anything with the organized Jewish community. Just walking through this space represents a barrier that they have to overcome. So as gorgeous as this new space is, and it really is, if I was consulting with your board, which I'm happy to do for a fee, I would talk about what percentage of your program takes place out in commercial venues. So when you talk about a Jewish film festival, I'm sure the temptation is to do it in this wonderful building, but no, you're doing it in a public venue.
Dairy Arts Center, yeah.
So when you do Jewish life in non-Jewishly identified venues, you get a less affiliated crowd participating. And so this is part of the process of the Jewish community going from introverted and inward-looking to extroverted and outward-looking. And if you're doing that, then that's great. And that's why your JCC may buck the national trend, where many other JCCs are not doing it.
That's an interesting.
Yes.
So when I talk to my Jewish friends and explain that I'm a humanistic Jew, they say, well, so am I. I want good for everybody. So my question is, people don't really get the difference between being a humanitarian and being a humanist. Is there any room for adding secular / humanistic in the title so it's clearer?
Well, the official name of the movement is Secular Humanistic Judaism, but all three words are pretty useless because I don't think that, and I actually like all of the words, and I'm not saying we should change it, but I think we do need to do a better job of explaining it because I think even secular is a problem. I think for a lot of Jews, secular means non-Orthodox. I think that there are a lot, because secular means without religion, but in Judaism, religious means the Orthodox. So you've got people in conservative and reform movements who would say, well, I'm not religious, and therefore I'm secular. But what we mean when we say secular is not believing in a God or in a God that answers personal prayers. The word for that is atheist, but people are really uncomfortable with that word, and it doesn't describe what I believe, it only describes what I don't believe. Humanism describes what I do believe, but again, that hasn't been put out there in a big enough way either, and I encourage all of you to Google it, because when you see it and when you read it, you will say, okay, yes, that describes me. I think then the next challenge is, what do you do about it? You know, do you want to be in community around that, or can you just go through the day-to-day life knowing that you're Jewish, or knowing that you're a humanist, or knowing that you're a humanistic Jew, and you don't need to be involved in community. So we who care about community have to be making the case of how does this improve people's lives. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to know if you know of any maybe more traditional religious Jews, say conservative, modern Orthodox, that are able to maintain their religiosity and theism and have a positive view of intermarriage. And if so, how you balance or how you reconcile those things.
Yeah, great question, and thank you for asking that. Yes, so it's pretty much a simple equation of you got two people, and so it could be that both of them are non-theistic, it could be that one of them believes and one doesn't, and it could be that